What in tarnation is a folk school?
A folk school can be defined in many ways, whether it be that it educates not only children but also adults, or whether it be defined through the types of courses they offer. People of the South have long attended folk schools to learn skills to help them to survive and thrive in the mountains. Classes offered by folk schools often included sewing, farming, and cooking, among other things. Folk schools were an innovative way to spread education throughout Appalachia, and both children and adults could use this resource to help improve their daily lives.
Some folk schools are more similar to a conventional school than one would expect. In folk high schools, which were inspired by educational facilities in Denmark, students often wrote essays and narratives similar to those that high school students write today. The Highlander Folk School in Monteagle, Tennessee, and the John C. Campbell Folk School in Brasstown, North Carolina, are institutes for adult education that generally do not grant academic degrees, though certain courses might exist leading to that goal.
Originally, folk schools started out in Scandinavian and European countries, including Germany, Austria, and most influentially, Denmark. When John C. Campbell and his wife Olive visited Denmark, they discovered many new ideas about how to educate people in the mountains. When John Campbell died in 1919, Olive applied these new ideas to open up the John C. Campbell Folk School, the very first folk school in America. That's right, the Tar Heel State boasts the first American folk school. Classes offered then included crafting skills such as basketry, weaving, knitting, and woodworking. The school's main goal was to better the community by bettering the lives of the people within it. By teaching the adults and some children of the community how to do simple crafting tasks, it became possible for many families to supplement their income in ways that were out of reach before. Although aiding the families in supplementing incomes was a big part of the goal of the John C. Campbell Folk School, many other goals were realized. By asking for donations, the school was able to cover tuition for many children and adults alike, allowing people who would otherwise be unable to attend to participate. The folk school also focused on more conventional parts of education, such as reading and writing, although these parts may not have been as rigorous as in a regular school.
The Highlander Folk School is another folk school that was founded in the Appalachian Mountains. Highlander opened its doors in 1932 after being founded by Miles Horton. Although both of these schools share the folk school title, unlike the John C. Campbell Folk School, this school had a focus on labor unions and organizing. In fact, the instructors at Highlander expected the people who attended classes there to already have a high school or college education, as the goal of Highlander was to build leaders to help guide the South into becoming an integrated society. Leaders at Highlander believed strongly in integration of the races and worked closely with Martin Luther King Jr., the legendary civil rights leader. Rosa Parks even attended a workshop at the folk school just months before refusing to give up her seat on a Montgomery bus.
In 1959, Tennessee officials investigated the folk school for communism before confiscating and closing it. Horton told reporters, "You can padlock a building, but you can't padlock an idea." Following this, the main building of the Highlander Folk School was burned down. Horton refused to back down, though. He regrouped and organized the Highlander Research and Education Center, which opened up in Newmarket, Tennessee in 1971. Today, the center works with grassroots organizations and promotes social change.
At first glance, folk schools and conventional schools of today have very little in common, but this simply isn't true. Some folk schools offered educations that, in some ways, were comparable to the mountain schools of that time period. At one folk high school, students wrote cursive papers for an English 3 class, showing that not only did the school offer traditional liberal arts courses, but also that they were offered in tiered levels very similar to the ones at our schools today. At the John C. Campbell Little Folk School, younger pupils learned folk songs and age-appropriate skills while being assigned chores. Students' poetry was compiled in a teacher-made literary journal called The Blackbird's Eye, which featured work from students of all ages.
The folk schools that are still open today vary greatly from the schools they were when they opened nearly a century ago. In a constantly evolving and incredibly industrial world, folk schools simply can't be relied on as the only form of education. They just don't provide enough of the skills needed to survive in the world today, so different from the skills that were taught in the past. Although both the Highlander Folk School and the John C. Campbell Folk School are still open and running today, their purposes have evolved with the changing times. Since racial integration was achieved, the Highlander Folk School has begun working with other organizations to promote social change and the betterment of society. The John C. Campbell Folk School still offers classes today, although they are no longer semester long. Week and day-long versions can still be taken, although they are now seen as more of a tourist attraction than a valid means of acquiring an income-producing skill.
Folk schools may seem like an odd form of education, but we live in a society vastly different from the ones in which folk schools flourished. In areas like the Appalachian Mountains, sometimes unorthodox forms of education are the most helpful and beneficial to the community and the people who reside within it.